Ole Miss is still cooking with Caleb Cunningham. Huh?
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, I'm Steven Willis, a former staff member at Ole Miss and a 10-year veteran member of the national media with Yahoo Sports. Today on the show, we talk about Caleb Cunningham confirming with David Johnson that he is going to be at Juice Fest at the end of the month. And we look at the SEC rankings by tiers headed into the SEC Media Days that will happen next week. Where does Ole Miss fall? Who has a legit chance to make the college football playoff? And where does your team fall? This is the Locked On Ole Miss Podcast, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. We're free and available on all the podcast apps and on YouTube. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen every day, and a special hello to the everydayers that make the show what it is. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As playoffs wind down, these sports stop sporting the way we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So obviously we talked about this. This is going to be a recruiting gossip type episodes. And the main focus of it is going to be Caleb Cunningham confirming with David Johnson that he will be attending Juice Fest. Juice Fest is a cookout that is held by Ole Miss. That's the reason for the cooking joke, by the way, for those that do not know. That is held at the end of the month. I think it's be July 27th. That is the weekend when the dead period ends. It's the weekend right before fall practice starts. It is an excellent weekend for Juice Fest or whatever you want to call the cookouts. Most every school is having these cookouts. So getting Caleb Cunningham on campus, that's a pretty big deal. Now we'll see who else attends, but Caleb Cunningham in the last month, he's been crystal balled or whatever to Alabama. Everybody thought he was going to Alabama, and Caleb Cunningham is a really good player. But what you need to know about Caleb Cunningham is his visit bumps are really, really high. Honestly, the first 2 weeks after a visit, you can't trust much of anything that is said, at least publicly, because he's just a kid. He's talking about he's had a good time because official visits are designed to be good times. So whenever he left Auburn was number one. When he left Florida was number one. When he left Alabama was number one. It's just a cycle that repeats over and over again. But Caleb Cunningham is a really good football player. We'll put this up again because this is back from June 20th, although David Johnson has confirmed it since, to where Caleb Cunningham will be visiting Juice Fest at the end of the month. This is a big potential get for Ole Miss because in the David Johnson article where he talked to Caleb Cunningham, the impression that was put out is that there's essentially a top three that's developing. And that top three is Ole Miss, Alabama, and Auburn. Now, I would not discount Mississippi State. Mississippi State wasn't mentioned. I would not discount Mississippi State because I think the campus is 20 minutes from his house. Jeff Lebby and everybody's putting a full court press on this athlete. It's going to be, there's a reason the national narrative on this kid is Mississippi State. But there's two things that Mississippi State has to fight against over the course of this recruiting cycle. The first one is Ole Miss is a potential top 5 team, a team that could host a playoff game that will be firmly in the news until signing day, essentially. So even if Ole Miss, the media types like me, aren't talking about Ole Miss every day, others are going to pick up the mail because of what Ole Miss football could be this year. The second thing is Mississippi State needs to win some games. Now, if Mississippi State hits their over-under, just barely hits their over, I think their over is 3.5, over-under is at 3.5. They go 4-8. They put a 4-8 on the board, which is absolutely possible with their schedule that they have. Go look up their schedule and do yourself a favor. It's kind of a little bit of a bear. I think it's at Georgia, Texas A&M, at Texas. There's a lot of games that could go really sideways for Mississippi State in year one under Jeff Lebby. So they have to figure out a way to get to a bowl game. And in a serious way, Mississippi State this season, is a lot like Ole Miss was in 2012. Just get to a bowl game, and then maybe Robert Kimdichie and Laramie Tunsil and all that can happen. You need to win enough to where they will pay attention to you. Mississippi State has to find a way to get to 6 this year, period. There's really no way around it. But Caleb Cunningham coming to Juice Fest, that could influence other players as well. LaDarian Clardy is still out there as well. Deuce Knight, who the Notre Dame people are still like, are you still committed? Are you still committed? And he's like, yes, but it's a business. And whenever he says that, you can't listen to everything he said before the but. We'll see if Ole Miss gets Deuce Knight at Juice Fest, if that happens. We'll see if a Kylan Deere turns around and goes to Juice Fest. This has a chance to be a big-time event. Winston Watkins, these big-time Ole Miss prospects, it will be a really interesting thing to see exactly where Ole Miss sits. Ole Miss is still in the game with a lot of high-level players, and it'll be really interesting to see exactly how they go and how they do. That is your recruiting gossip. We'll bring this up again. David Johnson talking about how Caleb Cunningham, he's continuing. He tells Inside the Rebels that he will be at Juice Fest next month, which is actually this month now. He has confirmed since then. This is really big-time news for the Ole Miss Rebels, potentially for Caleb Cunningham attending Juice Fest next month. We'll see who all is there with him. We'll see if he shows up. We'll see what happens, because that January 27th day, I think most schools are having their cookouts on that day. So we'll see exactly how that goes. Anyway, thanks again for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen of the day. We enter the most anticipated Ole Miss season of my lifetime, and we look at the SEC by tiers right after this. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop, but the playoffs wind down and we get fewer and fewer games. And the sports just aren't sportsing the way that we want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app, dream up any bets anytime I am in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. Maybe you can use it to bet on the Ole Miss Rebels over-under on wins, which is currently at 9.5 games. Maybe you're interested in the Ole Miss being negative 122 to make the college football playoff, or maybe you want to get a little more granular and your flavor is Jackson Dart at plus 1,500 to win the Heisman Trophy. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel is an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and you have to turn down the volume with all of that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you each and every single day to bring you the biggest stories without all of that screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, news, and opinions, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And there's also still time to join the Grove Collective and help Ole Miss football be elite. You can go to thegrovecollective.com and join today. So with SEC Media Days coming up next week, I think Lane Kiffin will be on the stage at 3 o'clock Central, 4 o'clock Eastern on Monday. I wanted to rank the teams in the SEC, but I didn't want to do just a 1 through 16 thing. I think that's a cop-out. I think that can be mixed. I think it's weird. I wanted to look at it through tiers, honestly, because I think there are 5 tiers in the Southeastern Conference this season, and it ranges from dominant team all the way down to better luck next year. But we're going to give you our list of our tiers in SEC football this year, and we're going to start with Tier 1. And Tier 1 is only one team. It's the Georgia Bulldogs. They're by themselves. They have the most dominant, best roster in all of college football. They're a team that's going to be expected to perform very well and win a national championship. We talk about how Ole Miss should be playoffs or bust this year. Georgia is national championship or bust. Whenever you look at Carson Beck and the players that they have on defense. When I was at the Under Armour All-American game a year ago, they told me that, hey, in 2024, this is the year that all top 100 players would be on Georgia's defense, and that would happen in 2024. This team is absolutely loaded with talent, and honestly, they don't deserve to be in a category and a tier with another SEC team. There is no other SEC team like them. Now, that's not saying they can't be beat. I'm just saying the expectations are noticeably higher there than at the other programs. The second tier has Ole Miss, Texas, Alabama, and Missouri. These are teams that are legit expecting to make the playoffs this year. It's a playoffs or bust. Georgia was a national championship or bust. This is a playoffs or bust. And Ole Miss, Texas, Alabama, and Missouri each have very talented rosters, manageable schedules. They miss certain people and teams. Like Ole Miss doesn't play Texas, Alabama, and Missouri. Missouri plays just Alabama. Alabama plays just Missouri. And I believe Texas misses all of them, but they get Georgia. I mean, Ole Miss gets Georgia as well. Alabama gets Georgia. So all the roads lead through Georgia. Their schedule is going to be absolutely ridiculous. But these 5 teams in the SEC can legit be playoffs or bust. Their expectations can be completely set on the playoffs. Now, the next tier, you have tier 3, which is Tennessee, LSU, and Oklahoma. These are teams that can still make the playoffs, but they have enough holes to where they can't necessarily be a playoffs or bust team. Like LSU is replacing a quarterback and 2 first-round picks at wide receiver. They had one of the worst defenses I've ever seen. Last year, Jaden Daniels led them to 10 wins. They were a very good team, and their schedule is relatively favorable, and LSU always has talent, but you can't put LSU in the next tier. Same with Tennessee. They have a new quarterback in Nico Iamaleava. They beat Iowa and kind of dominated them in the Citrus Bowl, but you can't necessarily put them in the next tier. You can see where you won't be surprised if they make the playoff, but you can't expect them to make the playoff. And then you have the Oklahoma Sooners, who had to replace their whole offensive line last season, which that's interesting. Their whole offensive line, there's holes. Jackson Arnold is a first-year starter at quarterback. Their defense is going to be pretty good. Brent Venables is a defensive coach, but there's that hole that lets you know, okay, this is why they're not going to make the playoffs. Really interesting stuff. Again, tier 1, we got the Georgia Bulldogs, kind of all by themselves. They have the most talented roster in all of college football. People are going to talk about Ohio State. Ohio State doesn't have Georgia's roster. They just don't. When you look at the second tier, these are the teams that can be playoffs or bust. They should rightfully expect to make the playoffs. That's Ole Miss, Texas, Alabama, and Missouri. And then you have the playoff contenders, the teams that if everything goes right, could find themselves in the playoffs in Tennessee, LSU, and Oklahoma. Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We talked about teams that have a legit shot to make the playoffs. What about the rest of them? How does the tiers fall for them? We'll talk about that whenever we get back. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows that cover every single league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Be part of history. All right, really interesting stuff. We went over the tiers, the top 3 tiers in the SEC in the last segment. We're going to do the last 2 and kind of talk about the conference as a whole. Next, the next 4 teams in tier 4 is Texas A&M, Kentucky, Florida, and Auburn. These are teams that might be good, but they're not going to have a chance of sniffing the playoff. They're not that good. I mean, Kentucky could be a 7-8 win ball team. They're not going to make the playoffs this year. The same goes for Texas A&M, being a first-year head coach team under Mike Elko. Even though you're getting Connor Weigman back and all of those guys like Reuben Owens, they're still back. Texas A&M is going to be good. I do not think they're playoff good this year. Florida, they just have that horrible schedule. I had Phil Steele on the show Tuesday night, and he talked about Florida's better than everybody thinks they are, but their schedule is just absolutely ridiculous. It is almost like a Florida State grad made that schedule. They play Miami, they play Florida State, they play UCF. Their only easy winnable game that they have on their schedule is Samford, the Bulldogs. The rest of them are at least interesting, but Florida's schedule is going to prevent them from winning 7 or 8 games. And people are joking, it's like, hey, if Florida wins 8 games, they should be in the talk for the playoff. No, they shouldn't. Shut up. And then the last one is Auburn, and Auburn's just coming from a hole. Whenever Hugh Freeze got there, that wasn't there. They're going to be a little bit better this year for Peyton Thorne. He's going to have Cam Coleman. There's going to be more weapons offensively. Now, running back Jarquez Hunter, we'll see exactly how he does. But if you look at each of the teams, you can see how these 4 do not necessarily have the opportunity to make the playoff. And people might argue Texas A&M, but we call them Texas 8-4 for a reason. I mean, if we're just going to be honest about it, like I said, Kentucky's not going to be there even with Brock Vandegrift. Florida, Auburn, the same thing. And the last one, the Tier 5. These are the, hey, better luck next year. These are the ones that have the best chance to have a coach fired. And start with Arkansas and Sam Pittman. They threw a Hail Mary up, hired Bobby Petrino. They got a nice transfer quarterback from Boise State. There's some hope there. There's people are thinking that Arkansas could make a push this season. I honestly, I just don't see it. They could be a very good, very scrappy team potentially. They could win 4, 5, 6 games. That's probably their threshold. Now, I'm still going to sweat when Ole Miss goes up to Fayetteville because Ole Miss doesn't play well in Fayetteville. But Arkansas is not going to be a particularly good team this season. Then you have the South Carolina Gamecocks. They lost Spencer Rattler. They lost Juice Wells. They lost a good portion of their team. Whenever you look at what they were 2 years ago, when they had Marshawn Lloyd and Juice Wells and Xavier Leggett and Spencer Rattler, they had some weapons offensively. They don't have those weapons now. They do have a new quarterback that they're pretty high on. I forget his name at the moment. I apologize. There's nothing that should be taken wrongly about that. But, you know, they're going to be plucky. Williams-Brice is a difficult place to play, but I just don't genuinely see them being an overly great football team in 2024. I don't. Sue me. Next up is Mississippi State. Mississippi State could win 4, win 5 games. That won't be good enough for what they need to do. Mississippi State absolutely needs to find a way to get to 6 this year. For recruiting, for the knowledge that the program is going the right direction. Another year missing a bowl game, and you're in danger of starting down a path like Nebraska did in 2014, to where Nebraska hasn't been to a bowl game in 8 years. And that's a weird statement to say, but we'll see. And the other one is Vanderbilt. And I have Vanderbilt in this Tier 5, but I think Vanderbilt's going to be better than they were a year ago, and they are likely to hit the over in wins this year. They got the Diego Pavia from New Mexico State to come in and play quarterback. They got Jerry Kill as an offensive analyst to help out Clark Lee. He left his job with New Mexico State to do that. There's a lot of players from New Mexico State that follow Jerry Kill, a lot of coaches. Basically, Vanderbilt, we make the joke all the time of the Vandy State Aggie doors, but Vanderbilt did go down and get a 10-win staff and best players off of them to come into Vanderbilt to make them a little bit better. So we'll see what happens. Jerry Kill has a reputation of taking downtrodden programs and making them good. So we'll see exactly how that goes for Jerry Kill and the Vanderbilt Commodores and Clark Lee and all of that as well. But those are the 5 tiers of SEC football right now. Georgia in a tier by themselves, but after that, you've got 7 teams that should all be competing for the playoff, 4 of which should absolutely have the goal of making it, 3 that can get in there, 4 that's kind of like in the next stage of their rebuild is going on, like Texas A&M, Auburn, Kentucky, and Florida. And then you have the also rans as well that's coming up in the rear. So we'll see exactly how that goes for them this season. But that's the tier list. Now, this SEC football season should be interesting because this is the first year without divisions since 1991, something like that. First year without divisions. The scheduling is going to be weird. Like, for instance, Ole Miss does not play Alabama and Auburn for the first time since 1991 or 1990, somewhere in there, to where you just didn't play them very often. And between that, the first-ranked team and the second-ranked team in the conference, it doesn't matter where you are. It could be Alabama and Auburn. It could be Ole Miss and State. It could be Texas and Texas A&M, 1 and 2. They would play in the championship game. So that's worth keeping an eye on. I think the competition this year should be fairly fierce between Texas, Oklahoma coming into a already stacked conference. I'm pretty excited to see that. And here, as we get into the weeds a little bit more, I don't think we can necessarily overlook the keys, the breakout performers. I think Brady Cook has a chance to have a really good year at Missouri. That's the reason I put them in my second tier. I don't know if Garrett Nussmeier is going to be able to do the same thing that Jaden Daniels did. That's the reason I put them in the third tier. Auburn's in the fourth tier because of Cam Coleman and the recruiting class that they had a year ago that's going to make them a little bit better. And Mississippi State and Vandy and those guys, Arkansas and South Carolina, are down where they are just because the transfer portal and recruiting has not been all of that good to them recently. So we'll see exactly how it goes. Should be a lot of fun. Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen. We have the most perspective surrounding Ole Miss sports, and it's one of the many reasons why we're the number one Ole Miss podcast out there, and thank you for that. But for your second listen, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows that cover each and every single league. Find Locked On Sports Today available on the free Fire TV Channels app. For those of you on YouTube, we're going to send you there right now. Howdy toddy, everyone.